Good evening. I'm your host, Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson, and welcome to Leadership Beyond Burnout, the show for women in leadership and emerging women leaders. Today, we have a special guest with us, Tatianna Brooks. We are going to discuss workplace psychological safety and the Workplace Psychological Safety Act. And let me welcome Tatianna. She's a licensed clinical social worker. Welcome, Tatiana.
Good evening, Dr. Kimberly. How are you this evening?
I am doing well. I'm so excited for our conversation today, especially with your expertise in trauma, especially with children. So I love to get some of your insights on the impact of workplace psychological safety.
Awesome. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Welcome. So I guess we should kind of start out with some rudimentary definitions of what workplace psychological safety is and what it is not.
Okay.
Um, um, so psychological safety is where you are at work, you feel safe to speak, to share your ideas, to collaborate without fear of retribution. It's relatively safe. You don't feel bullied or afraid to interact with your coworkers. Is there anything else you'd like to share with that definition and add on?
Well, definitely, especially in certain enclaves of couples and not couples, but groups of people. When it comes to working in environments that are different than your cultural identity, when it comes to being in academic environments that are different than your cultural identity, and having to navigate what that looks like, and navigating even what it feels like to be an other in this environment, and potentially like holding back certain things. So having that
Absolutely.
safety and security is not having to do those things.
Absolutely. I'm so glad that you brought in that cultural piece and the freedom to express your culture at certain
Hmm.
times. I'm thinking about, even though this isn't work, but it is a student's work. I don't know if you've heard the story of the young man who is being suspended. I believe it's Texas. He's being suspended because he has braids or locks in his hair,
Hmm.
and they just continually keep suspending him. So that, I'm sure that's causing a certain amount of trauma for him in that environment. And I know I've
I would imagine
definitely
for him. I would
pardon.
imagine for him. I would imagine for him. For any other students of color that may be in his class.
Yes,
For his family. So it just goes beyond just the single student.
absolutely. The whole environment. I know I've definitely experienced environments where people wanted to touch my hair or know
Hmm.
what are you doing to it, and that definitely doesn't feel safe. You need to protect yourself in that type of environment.
Right. And but then you also there's a part of feeling like you can't say anything, or the part of feeling like you can't respond. You can't respond in those ways that you might get behind closed doors with those that you trust, those that you feel safe with. And
Yes.
you may be able to say, like, I can't believe this person said this today, or I can't believe this person just walked up to me and just put her hand in my hair, or I can't believe that this person, told me that my hair was unprofessional because it was curly, or because I have locks, or just different things. Like, it's nice to finally be coming out of that shadow.
Absolutely. And even if we're not talking about cultural comfort as well as just being yelled at,
Hmm.
if you report certain things, will they be heard? Do
Right.
you have to, and that's part of the challenges with civil rights acts and other
Hmm.
anti-discrimination laws, is you have to prove that there was some type of intent behind the behavior. It's not just that it happened. There has to be an intent to marginalize or discriminate against you.
Right. So I have to be uncomfortable in the situation. I have to be made to feel uncomfortable as an other. Then I have to deal with whatever discrimination that I've been faced with. And now I have to prove that it happened.
Yes.
That is exhausting.
And so rarely is it something that can be proved. And the
Right.
systems typically aren't even designed uh, to have adequate reports or investigations. Um, I had a young man just recently try to utilize the system that his employer set in place to investigate workplace abuse. And I was so eagerly said, "Okay, what happened?" I was
Hmm.
so excited because from
Hmm.
what he shared, it was a very strict process, and there were things that just were not tolerated. And
Right.
his response was, "Nothing was done." And so he was faced with trying to fend for himself in this environment
Hmm.
and the betrayal of that.
Hmm.
Can you speak to what that's about, the betrayal of when you believe someone is going to support you, your work environment, and they don't?
I mean, it already feels uncomfortable and unsafe. So, in a safe environment, you would be able to go to your employer and say, you know, John isn't pulling his weight. We had an assignment and John was assigned to do X. Well, X is not done. So that's easily proven that John hasn't done his work. But when you go, if you have a supervisor who creates a inclusive environment where you can come with those types of things, then you believe that you can go to your supervisor and say, we were supposed to have completed this project today, but John was responsible for X and X was not done. Then the supervisor could rightfully follow up with that. However, if you're in a workplace where perhaps there's some nepotism, perhaps John is the supervisor's nephew,
Mm,
and the supervisor does not want to hear that, then the staff begin to feel like they can't go to him or her because they know that the supervisor is going to take John's side, regardless if John has completed the task that he is employed to do or not.
right.
So that definitely creates an unsafe environment. But now when we start to talk about, you know, diversities, cultural diversities, sexual diversities, life diversities, and just people just want to be able to do their job. Like I just want
Right,
to come to work and do my job. I mean,
right.
my skin is brown, but I don't want to be like I don't need you to know that I'm the best black woman for the job. How about I'm just the best person for the job because I'm
Mm,
qualified and I'm able to do the job.
right, right. And even when there isn't nepotism, just in general trying to get support,
Mhm.
uh, what often occurs is that they'll say, "Well, that's interesting because no one else has experienced this person that way. You're the first person to ever complain about this.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm the first person who is willing to take the risk, or maybe I have a different level of tolerance for foolishness."
Mhm.
So people have very different breaking points, and
Right.
just because it hasn't been reported doesn't mean that the incidents haven't occurred previously.
Absolutely. And I like the fact that you even bring up the ability to take a risk because in a safe culture, like in a safe work environment, staff do have the ability to take small risk. Like, I'm not talking about a risk where you just like disappear from work, but a risk of telling a supervisor something uncomfortable, or a risk of having an uncomfortable conversation, or a risk of standing up to someone who's saying something that's inappropriate, or who tells an off-color joke. Those are all risks that we take. And
Right.
socially, we don't talk about those things. We talk about, we learn to show up on time. We learn to, as brand new people coming into the workforce, we learn to wear a white shirt, or at least we did when we were younger. Wear a white,
Right.
always have a white blouse and some black slacks and black shoes, and you
Right.
don't want to stand out too much. You want to blend in, and but take a risk. And now,
Mhm.
now we work in an environment where, or work in environments where you might show up to a job interview wearing a gray suit and a navy shirt and take a risk
Purple hair.
of, right, take a risk of, looking out of the norm. But when employers when employers have employees that don't ever take risk, that is a good key sign that perhaps you don't have an emotionally safe environment.
Right. That is an amazing litmus test. And one of the things that I've also seen, I don't know if you've experienced this as well, is when the culture is unsafe, oftentimes, for some reason, there's a desire to preserve the reputation and the
Mhm.
comfort of the person who's accused of
Right.
bullying or creating the unsafe
Mhm.
work environment. And let's say the victim or the target of the bullying and the unsafe psychological workplace, they're forced to continue to collaborate with this person, be supervised by this person, have their livelihood jeopardized, because let's face it,
Mhm.
you cannot continue to come to work every day and be abused.
Right. Right. And then when people get to a breaking point and they come to work and they are explosive, whether it be that they're verbally explosive, they're physically explosive, people are like, "Oh, what happened? Like, are you
Mhm,
kidding me? Have we not noticed how this person has been bullied over and over again by this one person or this one set of people? Really?
mhm,
Are we really not paying attention?"
right. And it becomes the norm sometimes. And it's
Hmm.
just, well, that's just
That's
Jesse.
just
That's just
them.
Don.
Yep. That's just him. That's just
That's just
her.
how he is. You'll
Yes.
get used to it. He
You'll
doesn't
get
mean
used to
any
it.
harm, or
Yeah.
she doesn't mean any harm.
Hmm.
Uh, yes, I had and I probably mentioned this before on this program, but I've had an executive director who was famous and notorious for just having a screaming hissy fit
Hmm.
at anyone and everyone. And we had this system, because it was spread across different counties, where we would call each other to say, okay, she's on her way. Like, even at
Hmm.
the executive level, it was a different kind of she's on her way. It's like, just
Right.
let you know, keep everything in order. This person is on their way.
Hmm.
But your colleagues are like, girl, get this in order, because
Right.
she's gonna go off, or she's on the tirade today.
And it's accepted
Hmm.
because because that demonstration there is a demonstration that this unacceptable behavior is a part of this workplace culture.
Right, right. Because they've gotten a certain result, or they have a certain
Right.
reputation. I believe for this particular one, it was their connections,
Hmm.
because a certain part of the organization thrived on the ability to make certain connections and social relationships within the community. And this person drew all of that in, and no one wanted to jeopardize. The board could not afford not to have that executive director.
Absolutely. And therefore, that just intensified the bad behavior and reinforced the bad behavior.
Yes, it becomes sanctioned
Hmm.
behavior,
Right.
and the employee, the rest of the staff needs to adapt.
Yes. Yes. This person doesn't need to adapt to a conducive work environment. The conducive work environment needs to adapt to the person. And that's the development of toxic work environments.
And some might say, well, this still all sounds like an individual problem, because if they can't cut it,
Right.
they don't need to be here. They need to find somewhere else to go. But I think what we forget, in part, and tell me if you would disagree, is that it's not just an individual impact, but it affects teams, it affects their innovation, their motivation. It impacts, if
Output.
you're a single parent, maybe you decide that you just need to leave this environment. And
Right.
then there's the economic stability of that family. And if they can't get work again, what happens? Then they need to get assistance. And then it's the taxpayers' problem,
Right.
because corporations didn't take care of this toxic work environment.
And then there's the people go, that doesn't happen. I mean, Oh, yes, of course, that's how a ripple effect could occur, but that doesn't really happen because you know what? If that single mom really needs a job, then she'll buckle down and she'll get it together and she'll do it. It's time that we stop, stop ignoring and just stop making it okay to behave badly.
Right, right. Um, and that's been one of the challenges with anti-discrimination laws is, I think I mentioned that before, that it's incumbent upon the plaintiff to prove the discrimination
Mhm.
and prove intent. But with the Workplace Psychological Safety Act, it's actually there's more oversight by different panels, and it's not just the corporations policing themselves. They actually have a responsibility to create a safe environment, not just policies that are paper tigers that have
Mhm.
no teeth to them.
That's wonderful. I mean, that is really, really wonderful. As a woman of color who has had much excellence within my career, but in having excellence within my career, I've I've had to operate and I've operated in rooms where I am the only person that looks like me quite often,
Mm,
quite frequently. And this is something that, I've gotten used to from the time that I was a little girl. I was
right.
educated at predominantly white schools. Um, I went to undergraduate and graduate schools with predominantly white students, which
Mhm.
I I knew that I was okay with because I just it had become kind of normalized.
Right.
However, you know, more recently, I realized that even through all of that, I never embraced who I am as a woman, as a person. I
Mm,
never embraced that because, my hair had to be straight, even though I like my hair better curly. Like straight hair just on me just look it just doesn't look good on me. I like my curls better. I like my face framed in curls. That's
mhm,
that's the way I feel wonderful. I feel my best that way. You know, being able to dress a certain way. No, well, I just blend in. I want to just blend into the background. I just
mhm,
want to be safe because when I would step out, I can remember being in my early 20s. I was maybe 23, and
mhm,
I'm the only person of color at the table. And my VP of our department comes in, and we're all waiting for the meeting to start. And he looks down the table, and I don't know if it was intentional or unintentional, but it doesn't matter. What matters is the way that it made me feel. He looked at the only brown person at the table and said, "Hey, Tatiana, why don't you entertain us?" Excuse me?
what?
But I'm 22. I'm jovial, I'm bubbly, and maybe he meant it from a place of I'm a very entertaining person, but I certainly internalized it as a young woman of color. I internalized the fact that this man looked at the only person of color at the table and suggested that I should be responsible for entertaining the group in a professional meeting.
Mm,
Another time, I had some videotapes duplicated, and I utilized services from a job that I had previously. And the same gentleman, when I came back, my supervisor had asked me. I was an administrative assistant. My supervisor asked me to go into our duplication room and make a few videos, like make a few duplicates of a
okay.
video that she had given me. It was a marketing video. So instead of me figuring out how to work the machines, because I'd never worked the machines before, instead of me taking the time to figure all of this out, I simply just walked down the street to my old job, got to see my old coworkers, got to hang out for 15 minutes while they duplicated and made me 10 videos instead of me going in and making two. So when I came back,
Ingenious.
I was like, it's a donation from my other company. I mean, it wasn't a big deal. But the same person, as I walked past his office, he goes, "Hey, Tatiana, I hear you bootleg some videos for us." What?
What?
Yeah, I can definitely say that I did not feel safe in that environment.
And those are such wonderful examples because those can I can hear that being made quite innocuous, or
Mhm.
someone who doesn't understand or hasn't been educated, they're not culturally competent, that they don't understand the significance and of those comments and how
Right.
they're degrading and what kind of expectation. It would simply be, well, that's just how he is. He loves to joke.
But it wasn't funny, and it was hurtful, and it hurt my little 22-year-old feelings.
Right.
And obviously, it was impactful enough for me to still remember it because I am not 22 now.
Oh, well, you're fooling me. Okay, I wasn't. I thought you meant last year.
But I will say that this was when my 23-year-old son was a baby. That's when this
Mm,
happened. And these experiences still resonate with me because I have had so many conversations in my head of how might I respond differently now?
right. Mm. How
And
might you respond differently now?
well, that's interesting. Help me understand why it is that I'm the one person in the whole room that you would feel would be most entertaining. Why
Mm,
don't you let us know, John?
right.
No, John, I did not bootleg those. Like bootleg? What exactly do you mean by that?
Hmm.
Are you suggesting that I've fraudulently made some videos for the
Right.
benefit of myself? Like, is that what you're suggesting?
Mm.
Why don't you help me understand that?
So you'd find your voice and you'd utilize it.
I would. I would. And I would not accept that I was just being sensitive.
Right. That's that's another good buzzwords. That's often
Mhm.
those are the words that invalidate people's
Yeah.
experiences.
Yeah.
It diminishes the experience. So you begin to question
Mhm. Yeah.
your experience of reality,
Right.
and how does that not fall into your
Mhm.
personal life, your work life, your ability
Right.
to produce a product when you can't even discern your own experiences?
Right. Right.
And
Absolutely.
that costs employers significantly because people
Mhm.
leave, they quit, they find new jobs, and
Right.
it costs at least someone's salary and a half to replace a person.
Indeed. Indeed.
Mm, mm, mm. So, what can a leader do if, because I understand the Workplace Psychological Safety Act, it hasn't been, it's not enacted all over the United States. It's really
Mhm.
just beginning to get its legs. And I encourage everyone to visit that website, Workplace Psychological Safety Act. .org, I believe it is. Um, because we shouldn't have to legislate just doing what is right. We can begin as leaders, as humans, to begin to examine how we interact. Is there something that you would suggest someone in leadership could begin to do to make the workplace safer?
Um, as a leader, one thing that I I self-reflect a lot. As a leader who works with new clinicians who are coming into the field, I remember this is probably about 5 to 7 years ago. I was working with a young clinician, and she was having some issues. She was having some interpersonal issues with her direct administrative supervisor.
Mhm.
And so I created a safe space, a space that was safe enough for her to come in and for her to talk about this relationship and the impact that this relationship was having with her and her administrative supervisor. And I began to think to myself, what if this was me? What if this supervisor that she was having problems with was me?
Mhm.
And so from that point, I had decided that I did not want to provide clinical supervision to my administrative, like, because at that time I wasn't in leadership. But
Mhm.
at that point, I had decided if I ever find myself in leadership, I'm not going to accept a role of clinically supervising my administrative supervisees.
Absolutely. It took me a second, but I definitely see the distinction because
Hmm.
unfortunately, administrative supervision can be a lot of correction, a lot of
Right.
um, disciplining.
Hmm.
We're in providing information, so you can't. It's very difficult to discipline and then be the safety net as well.
Right. Right. Right.
Not impossible, but it can be quite challenging.
Absolutely, especially for a new leader. For a new leader does not need to be tasked with that because that's
Right.
going to be like it's hard enough to grasp a hold of all the things that you need to do as a new leader to begin with. And now being able to balance these very like delicately balanced because it's a delicate balance. Delicately balance between creating a safe space for your staff and being able to still be a disciplinary, not well, disciplinarian when needed. I couldn't think of a better word.
Mhm.
However, when I was working with her, you know, I strayed away from simply telling her to quit her job or simply giving her the advice to just leave your job. But instead
Mhm.
I gave her the space to do the critical thinking, to do the rumbling that she needed to do in order for her to feel like she was being empowered to make the decisions that were going to be best for her. So we talk about some things and then she'd go back and try them out. She'd come up with some interventions that she felt might be good, and then she'd go back to work and she'd try it out. And, you know, after a while, she ended up staying with the job. The supervisor ended up moving to a different department, but she ended up staying with the job. And the employer now didn't have to pay a human and a half to retrain a new staff member.
Right. So there was the freedom. So part of what I hear you saying is that when leaders allow staff members to have the freedom to make mistake, to be
Hmm.
able to address their concerns and try it without fear of retribution.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because we can readdress or fix almost anything.
Mhm.
It doesn't have to be the end of the world. And as leaders, giving our staff the ability to come to us, having had made a mistake, having had taken a risk, and being able to make a mistake, because it's not about the mistake. It's
Mhm.
more so about how do we fix the mistake or how do we bring it back? Now, obviously, we're not talking about, sweeping several $1 million of mistake under the rug. That's not what we're talking about. But, in the world in which we work in as, mental health providers, we're working with people's lives. And the work
Mhm.
that we do is vitally important to the clients that we have. But we are also human, and so we make mistakes. So creating a position or creating a space of constant, like feeling the constant need to be perfect,
Mhm.
first of all, it's unrealistic. And then
Absolutely.
secondly, it creates a significant amount of anxiety.
Right.
Why
Right.
not create a creative space where people can actually think critically? We don't have to make every decision for every staff member.
Right.
Give them the space to make the decision. And even if it's not a decision that they're going to make the final on their own, creating a space where they could make a decision, they can throw some ideas out there, they can be creative, and they can have this rumbling conversation with their supervisor. And then if it's viable, the supervisor and employee or the director and employee or director and employees, they then execute it, but also that empowers the employee or employees to feel as though they have some part in it, which at that point also gets buy-in from the employees.
Mhm. Yeah, that ownership, and they have some
Mhm.
ownership, autonomy, the
Yes,
ability to test ideas and see the results and make adjustments. So it sounds like a
absolutely.
lot of trust. It's a
Mhm.
trusting environment.
Right, right. The employees have to be able to trust the employer. The employer has to be able to trust the employees. And that takes time and effort. And you know what? And it also takes some vulnerability on the employer's part too, to
Right.
say, I've never done this before. I'm trying something new. So how about we work through this together, Kim? How about, like I know what I'm doing as a supervisor or a manager or a leader or director. You know what you're doing as a clinician. However, we've never embarked on this project before or this
Right.
type of project before. So how about we do this together? And
Mhm.
we're gonna make some mistakes along the way, but how about we show each other grace?
Right. And if the organization has room for that to give the overall objective
Mhm.
without dictating the the strategies and the
Right.
approach, it does increase the innovation. It does increase
Mhm.
the safety. It does increase buy-in because people don't feel like they are prescriptive robots who are
Right.
following some script that was handed down to them.
Indeed. Indeed.
There was a saying that when I was in the military is lead from the front, if not from the rear, like how you were saying the supervisor, the leader being vulnerable as well, because that
Mhm.
just shows so much. Because if they can be vulnerable in that environment, I can also be vulnerable. It's
Right.
safe.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I think one of the things that we've also discovered is that it it definitely bonds the team together so well. I had the opportunity to be in a training earlier, and it was so amazing to me how the facilitators created such a safe environment in such a short time. And I was keeping in mind the things that we were going to talk about today and just noticing that yes, they were vulnerable. They used a certain tone and pitch in the way that they were
Right.
talking to others.
Mhm.
They ensured that all ideas were heard. They encouraged people who wouldn't talk to speak up and to
Mhm.
share their ideas, because I think the introvert or the quiet person or the person who doesn't want to make waves,
Right.
they just go unnoticed.
Mhm. And that's a way to also create emotional safety because when a leader calls on the person who has not said anything in the group discussion, but the leader calls on the person with kindness, and the leader is very cognizant, very aware of the tone of their voice, the speed, the pitch, and that leader says, "Hey, Kimberly, I noticed that you didn't say anything. Would you like to share something that you're thinking about? What are you thinking about?"
Mhm.
And giving Kimberly the opportunity to perhaps speak up if she didn't feel like there was, giving her the space to speak up and contribute if she felt like she wanted to contribute, but also giving her the space to be able to safely decline. Because perhaps Kimberly might feel like everything that she agrees with everything that's been said and she's okay. But it
Yes,
still gives Kimberly an opportunity to feel heard
right. And
and
also
choose.
gathering data in other ways as well. Like,
Mhm,
hey, sometimes after we leave a meeting, you might come up with more ideas. Feel free to put those in writing, send it to an email, because some people
mhm.
just converse better through different forms, through email, through drawing, through the written word instead of speaking that out verbally.
Right. And to your point, not everybody is going to think quickly on their feet and have an answer right then and there. Some people need to go process, let it settle in, decide, and then type it out.
Mhm. I have always I'm famous for sometimes I can think of many moments in time where it's like, I wish I could go back because I would say this now.
Yes.
Because, and if especially now, I know we're talking about a safe environment, but I'm also thinking about when it isn't psychologically safe
Hmm.
and someone says or does something so egregious, and
Right.
the people are looking like, wow, why didn't you say something? I wouldn't let them say that to me, but sometimes it's such a shock to the system that this is
Yes.
even occurring, that
Right.
it's sometimes it's not that you don't know how to stand up for yourself or speak
Hmm.
for yourself. It's just it's traumatizing, and it
Yes.
activates that fight, flight, or freeze, and you're
Hmm.
just in freeze, and you just
Yes.
have a smile because
Hmm.
I'm not sure what to say to this.
Right. And I'm not sure. I don't have the words to navigate this conflict right now
Right.
because I've never had to navigate this type of conflict in a professional environment before.
Right.
Because if I was home with my sister and my brothers and they said something like this to me, I would respond like this.
Right.
However, I'm not at home and these aren't my siblings. And I do need to come back here again tomorrow and I do need to be able to work. And
Mhm.
we have to create spaces that are accepting of differences, not just
Mhm.
culturally, just differences, period.
Right.
We all didn't grow up in the same house with the same people and the same parents. And if we did, we'd be siblings. And even if we were all siblings, we still wouldn't get along. If you don't believe me, just ask siblings.
Right.
We wouldn't
And
get
there's
along all the time.
and there's so much value in
Mhm.
diversity of thought,
Yes.
not just in being or color, race, gender,
Mhm.
sexuality, but just diversity of thought. I love when I'm in a group and someone says something novelly that I hadn't thought of before. Um,
Right.
I had the experience earlier today, and I don't know why I had this random thought, but I put in the chat. It's like the phrase "at the end of the day" is a
Mhm.
pet peeve. We were talking about pet peeves. I said, because does it not apply at the beginning of the day? And someone
How
responded,
about at
oh
lunchtime?
man, I never thought of it like that.
True.
I know I'm being silly right now. But I really love this conversation we're having, and that knowing what I know now, there are so
Mhm.
many environments that I wish I could go back to, because as you said, just being a young person, I felt like I didn't have the skills at that
Right.
point to navigate some of
Mhm.
those environments. And sometimes it had nothing to do with race or my gender. It was just
Right.
a very toxic environment.
Mhm.
And I grew up in Detroit,
Mm.
and when I left, it was such a different world, and that's because Detroit was a predominantly African American city. Um, Before the Pledge of Allegiance, uh, the song "Lift Every Voice and Sing" was played. So
Okay.
I had it was psychologically safe for me and for my culture. And so I didn't know
Mhm.
anything else. I didn't grow up with any insecurities because it was culturally homogenous
Mhm.
everywhere I went. The
Right.
mayor, everyone in
Right.
leadership. So when I came arrived in Southern California, and I saw and heard some of the things that I heard, it was, I don't know if it was as much shock or almost like I was at a museum trying to sift through and understand what exactly was happening, because this is foreign territory for me.
I'm definitely sure that it was much shock.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to thank you for being here with us today, Tatiana. You've given so much insight through your years of experience and definitely some of your personal experiences. Is there anything you would like to share with our audience before we sign off today?
Don't be afraid to increase your own self awareness. Don't be afraid to make that commitment to yourself to first know thyself. And just because we know ourselves doesn't mean that we have to go out there and spread ourselves all over everybody. However, knowing ourselves, knowing what makes us tick, and also just being very empathetic to other people. We don't have to walk in their shoes, but try to understand what their shoes are like. Try to understand what their lives are like. Maybe look at the big picture. Where did they come from? What who are they? Because in a world where we're very dismissive of people, well, I don't know any of us that like to be dismissed. So it only takes being kind to one person. Kindness goes a long way. That's all.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm Dr. Kimberly L. Wilson with Leadership Beyond Burnout, and we will see you next week, Thursday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, here on E360 TV.